It started with a simple envelope in my mailbox, no return address, just a plain white envelope that upended my entire world. I tore it open without a second thought, knowing Ethan's construction job sometimes required him to get sensitive documents mailed to our home. But inside wasn't a building contract or legal paperwork. It was a single photograph that damn near stopped my heart. There was my husband, the love of my life for 10 years, in a tight embrace with some faceless woman. Her slim arms were wrapped around his neck as they kissed passionately in what looked like a hotel room. The bile rose in my throat as I gripped the photo so tightly it crinkled in my hands. This couldn't be real. It had to be some sort of twisted joke or mistake. Ethan loved me, didn't he? I tried calling him, but it went straight to voicemail. He was probably on one of those job sites out in the middle of nowhere with no cell service. As the minutes ticked by, the shock and dismay metastasized into a burning rage. By the time he finally got home that evening, I was a powder keg ready to explode. Ethan waltzed through the front door with his typical goofy smile. "Hey, Hon, sorry I'm so late. You'll never believe the day I had on site." I cut him off, slamming the photograph down on the kitchen counter. "I'll never believe the day you had. What about this, Ethan? Care to explain?" His smile withered like a flower in a drought as his eyes went wide with horror. "Cora, that's not... Not what? Not you? Because it sure as hell looks like you to me." He opened and closed his mouth like a gasping fish. I felt hot tears of rage and heartbreak streaking down my cheeks. "Who is she? How could you do this to us, to our marriage?" I was practically screaming now. Ethan ran a shaky hand through his cropped brown hair. "Babe, you've got to believe me. It's not what it seems. I would never." I wasn't having any of his desperate, empty reassurances. "Don't you dare babe me. I want the truth, all of it. No more lies." He simply nodded, the fight seeming to drain out of him. Okay, you're right, I'll explain everything, but you have to trust me, Cora. I love you, and I swear this isn't... It's complicated, okay?" So that's where the long, miserable night began. A night of Ethan spilling his guts about things I never could have imagined. Illegal funds, affairs, betrayals. A night that marked the unraveling of the life I thought I knew. My world shattered by the simple contents of a plain white envelope, and it was only the beginning of this nightmare. The truth started to pour out of Ethan like a dam bursting open that night. With trembling hands, he admitted that the woman in the photo was Rachel Wilkins, a designer he'd hired to work on some commercial projects. Ethan swore it had started as an innocent flirtation, but quickly escalated into a full-blown affair over the past 6 months. "I'm so sorry, Cora. I never meant to hurt you like this," he kept repeating through choked sobs. But that was just the sickening tip of the iceberg. Ethan also confessed that he'd been embezzling funds from his construction company, Bennett Builders, to support his illicit rendezvous with Rachel and cover up other shady business dealings. "It started small at first," he said, unable to meet my eyes, "just skimming a little off the top from material overages and fake invoices, but then it spiraled out of control to cover my lies." My head was spinning from the relentless blows of betrayal. As if the emotional devastation of his affair wasn't enough, now I realized our entire financial future was in jeopardy too. Years of going to night school to become a nurse, saving every penny we could, all built on Ethan's lies and crimes. "How could you?" I demanded, fists clenched in fury. "Everything we have, our home, our savings for kids one day, all of it built on cheating and stealing?" Ethan just shook his head, tears streaming down his face. "I never wanted any of this, Cora. I got in too deep and I was scared, okay?" That's when he dropped the worst bombshell of all. That snake Rachel hadn't been a willing accomplice. She'd been the one driving Ethan into this pit of deception and fraud. Even worse, she was just a pawn being used by Ethan's longtime business partner, that scumbag Daniel Clark. "It's all been an elaborate scheme by Daniel to take over Bennett Builders," Ethan admitted hoarsely. "He's the one who set this whole sordid thing in motion, trying to disgrace me through the affair so he could push me out." I felt like I was going to be sick. Daniel had been my husband's closest friend and most trusted business advisor for over 15 years. And all along he'd been meticulously plotting to steal the company out from under us, using Rachel to cuckold Ethan and make him look like a criminal. The vile depths of his depravity knew no bounds. Please, Cora, you have to believe me, Ethan pleaded desperately, seeing the thunderous look on my face. I never meant for any of this to happen, Daniel, just... Shut up, I roared, feeling like I might actually strike him. Just shut your damn mouth. My husband's sniveling attempts to explain himself were just pouring salt in the wound. There would be no easy forgiveness for this, not when the man who was supposed to be my life partner had been so utterly deceitful and weak. Daniel Clark had managed to turn Ethan into his slobbering puppet. But if that bastard thought this would be the end, that Ethan's disgrace would let him slither away with the company like a thief in the night, he had another thing coming. I may have been reeling now, but the sting of betrayal was quickly hardening into an icy resolve. Daniel wanted to play this game? Well, I was about to give him and Rachel a hell of a lot more than they bargained for. This was just the beginning. The rage simmered inside me for days after Ethan's gut-wrenching confession. As much as I wanted to lash out, to scream and hurl things at that sniveling weasel of a husband, I knew I had to keep my cool. For once in our marriage, I was the one who needed to be strong and clear-headed. I'd always prided myself on being a skilled nurse, compassionate yet unflinching in the face of pressure. Now those same qualities were getting channeled into withering determination and sheer vindictiveness. Daniel Clark wanted to rip apart my family and take Ethan for everything he had? Well, turnabout was fair play. While Ethan moped around the house in a haze of self-pity, I got to work. First thing was poring over all the financial records I could get my hands on from Bennett Builders. Bank statements, ledgers, tax forms, I devoured them all like case files, looking for any irregularities or ammunition I could use. This has to stop, Cora, Ethan pleaded weakly one morning as I piled documents across the kitchen table. Just leave it be before you get yourself in trouble, too. I fixed him with an icy stare. The only trouble I'll be causing is for Daniel and his little tramp Rachel. You've already lied and stolen enough for 10 lifetimes. It's time I return the favor. His eyes went wide with shock and maybe a hint of fear at the hardness in my voice. Good, let the sniveling coward be afraid for once. With the paper trail providing proof of Ethan's shady money trails, I contacted an old friend from nursing school, Stacy Wilcox. She'd become a hotshot corporate lawyer, an utter shark in the courtroom. Just the kind of ally I needed right now. Let me get this straight, she said after I laid everything out over coffee one day. Your slimeball husband got bamboozled into an affair to embarrass and discredit him. All so this Daniel character could take over the family business? I nodded gravely. That's the long and short of it. Ethan made things easier for Daniel by cooking the books, too. But I need to make sure Clark gets what's coming to him, one way or another. Stacy's dark eyes glinted with undisguised glee. Well, you've come to the right place, my friend. This is Gardens and Wilcox's sweet spot, taking down arrogant dirtbags like your buddy Daniel. We spent the next few days plotting, putting together an airtight case that would decimate Daniel professionally, legally, and financially. Stacy had some excellent ideas about using whistleblower protections to leak evidence to the authorities. We'd hit him with fraud, tax evasion, racketeering, you name it. I also started quietly reconnecting with some of Ethan's most loyal employees at Bennett Builders. Trustworthy folks like Gary Wilkins and Miriam Alvarado, who had been there since the company's early days. With a little cajoling, I convinced them to come on board as insiders, feeding us information. We could never prove it, Gary told me in hushed tones, but we always suspected Daniel was up to shady stuff behind the scenes. Miriam simply nodded. If there's a way to take him down, count me in, Mrs. Bennett. Between Stacy's legal wrangling and my covert informants at the company, an audacious plan started taking shape. One that would publicly humiliate Daniel, rip away his ill-gotten wealth, and quite possibly land him in prison. Maybe it was petty vengeance, but he'd launched the first strike at my family. If Daniel thought he could cower me, think again. He was about to learn an important lesson on just how cutthroat a woman scorned could be. With the broad strokes of a plan in place, I knew it was time to start putting the pieces in motion to take Daniel Clark down. First step was shoring up my covert alliances at Bennett Builders while keeping my scheming completely invisible to that snake. Thank you both for agreeing to meet me, I told Gary Wilkins and Miriam Alvarado one evening at a quiet diner across town. We were the very picture of discretion, myself and the two longest-tenured employees at my husband's company, tucked away in a dingy corner booth. Gary, a balding number cruncher who had been with Bennett Builders since its earliest days, simply nodded. Of course, Mrs. Bennett. We want to help in any way we can to get that creep Daniel. Miriam, the firm's no-nonsense site manager, scowled in agreement. He's gotten too big for his britches, thinking he can walk all over good people. It's about time someone put Daniel in his place. I smiled thinly. Well, that's exactly what I have in mind, but it's going to take some clever maneuvering on all our parts. Over the next hour, I outlined the insane, high-stakes gambit I was contemplating with the help of my lawyer friend Stacy, how we would systematically gather evidence of Daniel's corrupt practices, money laundering, tax fraud, extortion, all while maintaining a veneer of total ignorance about his shady dealings. This is one hell of a long con, Miriam observed with an impressed raise of her eyebrows. You've got bigger stones than most, Mrs. Bennett. Just call me Cora, I replied coolly. And believe me, if that bastard thinks he can try to rip my family apart without consequences, he's going to deeply regret underestimating what I'm capable of. The two exchanged a loaded glance before Gary spoke up. You know we're risking our jobs, maybe even criminal charges if we get caught playing double agent like this, right? I cut him off with a steely glare. Which is why discretion and commitment are absolutely critical here. I wouldn't have brought you both into this if I didn't know you were trustworthy. An uneasy silence fell over the booth before Miriam reached across and gave my hand a supportive squeeze. You can count on us, Cora. That weasel Daniel has had this coming for a long time. With my corporate spy network secured, things started moving swiftly. I played the part of the oblivious, jilted wife to a T, all while using Stacy's legal prowess to start gathering the receipts and documents that would bury Daniel in a tidal wave of trouble. At the same time, Miriam and Gary were my eyes and ears, getting me insider access to Daniel's communications and subtle ways to divert files and funds from under his nose. More than once, one of them had to stall for time or creatively cover for my snooping before Daniel got suspicious. Jesus, Cora, are you sure you want to keep going this far? Miriam asked one evening over drinks after a close call. Things are starting to get crazy. I simply drained my glass and gave a grim nod. There's no going back now, not after everything Daniel's done. Despite all the careful groundwork over the past few months, I could feel my nerves building as the grand sting operation against Daniel Clark drew near. One little slip-up from anyone in our ragtag team of conspirators, and everything could unravel in a disastrous instant. Stacy assured me constantly that she had put together an airtight legal case that would demolish Daniel in court. Whistleblower protections, subpoenas, you name it. She'd covered every base to make our evidence unimpeachable. But that didn't make seeing this insane plan through to the end any less terrifying. You don't have to go through with the public part if you don't want to, she told me one afternoon, clearly able to sense my growing anxiety. I can handle the legal actions without you being there. I shook my head adamantly. No way. If we're going to take Daniel down, I want to be right there to see the self-righteous look get wiped off his smug face. Stacy smirked. In that case, you'd better get ready, because the fireworks are about to start. The venue Stacy chose for our sting operation was Bennett Builders' annual corporate retreat at a swanky hotel in downtown Philadelphia. One of those self-congratulatory blowouts Daniel always relished, filled with overpaid executives publicly patting themselves on the back. As a former spouse, I was able to secure myself a room at the hotel under the radar. The morning of the big event, I suited up for war, a stylish burgundy dress that wouldn't look out of place, but underneath, I had a hidden microphone to capture all the drama for the cameras. Are we set? I muttered under my breath as I checked my appearance one final time. Gary's voice crackled in my earpiece. All good on our end, Cora. Just waiting on your signal. Remember, we've only got one shot to pull this off, Miriam chimed in tensely. If Daniel gets tipped off before we're ready? He won't, I stated firmly, forcing down my rising doubts. We've planned this too carefully. Just stick to the plan. Making my way down to the opulent ballroom, my heart was pounding like a frightened rabbit's. There was Daniel holding court near the front, looking resplendent in an Italian suit as he shook hands and smiled for the cameras. The arrogant prick had no idea what was coming. When he took the stage to kick off the event with his typical bombastic remarks, I gave the signal to my teammates to get in position. As Daniel launched into his well-rehearsed diatribe about integrity and trust, the air was suddenly pierced by a deafening audio clip. "You really think Ethan's stupid little wife is going to figure out our scheme?" Daniel's unmistakable voice rang out over the speakers. "Just keep doing your job, and I'll take care of making him the fall guy for everything." You could have heard a pin drop as the crowd of Bennett Builders employees looked around in stunned confusion. And there was Daniel, frozen in place with a sickly pallor as more and more audio clips began playing. Clips of his illegal dealings, his money laundering, loans gained through extortion, everything. Before the gasps and murmurs could grow too loud, I stood up and fixed Daniel with a look of pure venom. "Looking for the little wife who's going to ruin you?" I asked coldly, making a big show of removing the hidden microphone. "Well, here I am, Daniel. Payback's a bitch." As stunned security personnel surrounded Daniel on stage, I steadied my nerves with a few deep breaths. Because the biggest bombshell was yet to come. The look of utter shock and humiliation on Daniel Clark's face as he was led away in handcuffs will forever be seared into my memory. All the arrogance and bravado had drained from the man who thought he could rip my family apart without consequence. As pandemonium erupted in the hotel ballroom, with reporters clamoring for comments, I felt Stacy's reassuring hand on my shoulder. "You did it, Cora. That smug bastard is finished." I simply nodded, unable to process the tidal wave of emotions washing over me. Part of me felt immensely relieved, even triumphant at seeing karma so utterly demolish Daniel. But another part felt hollow, sickened by the depravity this whole sordid affair had exposed. In the ensuing days, the full breadth of Daniel's crimes came spilling into the open like a ruptured dam. The FBI raids, the asset seizures, the damning money trails, it was a never-ending deluge of scandals splashed across the headlines. As for the future of Bennett Builders, it was clear the damage was cataclysmic and likely fatal. All those years of my husband's hard work and sacrifice, tarnished and discredited because of one man's boundless greed and depravity. So many good people whose livelihoods were now thrown into turmoil. Through it all, Ethan remained a ghost in our home. Ashamed, distant, and unable to meet my eyes, I oscillated between feeling sorry for the shattered man before me and burning contempt for his utter weakness in letting Daniel manipulate him. "What's going to happen to us?" he asked one night, voice hoarse and cracking. I don't know how to even begin making this right, Cora." I fixed him with a look of pure ice. "Well, considering you've now confessed to multiple felonies, making things right might start with finding a damn good criminal lawyer." The words hung like a leaden weight between us. Despite the small solace of payback against Daniel, this wasn't the life I ever envisioned for us. No family, no future financial security. All that remained was the bitter ash of betrayal. Ethan seemed to wilt before me as tears welled in his eyes. "I never meant for any of this, Cora. You have to know that. Everything I did was out of fear, and—" I held up a hand to silence him, feeling my own rage and grief bubbling up to the surface. "Save it, Ethan. You were weak, and it cost us everything. All the sacrifices, all the plans we had, it's all gone now because you chose to lie and cover up for that snake Daniel instead of coming clean." He opened his mouth to respond, but I wasn't finished unloading the torrent of fury and anguish that had been simmering inside. And the worst part? I had to be the strong one. I had to be the person who took that monster down, who fought for justice and the truth, because you were too spineless to stand up for your own family. Ethan simply dissolved into anguished sobs, covering his face with his hands as I stood over him, chest heaving with the force of such raw emotion. In that moment, I felt everything: rage, disgust, sadness, remorse for the lives we'd sacrificed to this ugly betrayal. But most of all, despite the relief of seeing Daniel pay for his villainy, all I felt was a bone-deep, aching weariness. Because even though I'd executed the perfect vengeance, what did we really have left? In the aftermath of Daniel Clark's spectacular downfall, it felt like the dust would never settle. Ethan faced a litany of criminal charges, not to mention an endless parade of lawsuits from Bennett Builders' creditors and business partners. My vengeance had been exacted, but at what cost? "This is a complete shit show, Cora," Stacy remarked one afternoon, tossing a towering stack of legal notices onto my kitchen table. "The feds are aiming to throw the book at Ethan, and that's not even the half of it with the civil cases piling up." I sighed, feeling the weight of the world on my shoulders. So what are our options here? Ethan can't afford to fight all these battles alone. Well, he's got two choices from my perspective, Stacy laid out bluntly. Option 1 is to try and cut some kind of deal by cooperating, maybe even testifying against Daniel's underlings to mitigate things. My eyes narrowed. And the other option? Chapter 11 bankruptcy, she stated flatly. It could help leverage a lot of the civil liabilities if we can prove he was acting under duress from Daniel's extortion scheme. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my throbbing temples as I digested this miserable new reality. Ethan was either going to sell his soul to try and stay out of prison or lose what little we had left trying to avoid total financial oblivion. Jesus, what a goddamn mess, I muttered darkly. Ethan entered the room then, looking haggard and utterly dejected in stained sweats. I couldn't even muster any animosity towards my husband in that moment, just bone-deep pity for the pathetic shadow of a man he'd become. "We were just strategizing our options," Stacy stated coolly, ever the pragmatist. "You know you're in a pretty tight spot here, Ethan." He simply nodded warily. "I know. God, I know." He turned his hollow gaze towards me. "Listen, Cora, I'm sorry about all this. Truly I am. Maybe you'd be better off just walking away while you still can." "Don't even start with that bullshit," I cut him off fiercely. Despite everything, something deep inside me still rallied at the thought of just abandoning him and Bennett Builders to this cyclone of devastation. Pushing myself up from the table, I began to pace as the pieces slowly clicked into place in my mind. "Okay, here's what we're going to do. First, we go with Chapter 11 bankruptcy proceedings and cut our losses on the civil side of things. Let the creditors pick over what's left of the business." Stacy leaned forward intently. "Not a bad start. It'll buy us some breathing room at least. But Ethan still has all those criminal charges hanging over his head." I nodded grimly. "I know. That's where he lays it all on the table for the prosecution. Everything about how Daniel manipulated and threatened him, the financial fraud, the works. He has to sell them the full hell of being Daniel's victim to try and cut some kind of deal on reduced sentencing." The two of them shared an uncertain look, but I pressed onwards with my hastily arranged stratagem. And while that's going on, I'll get the ball rolling on restarting the company. Not Bennett Builders, obviously. That name is radioactive after all this. But a new entity with all new management and oversight. Stacy's eyebrows rose incredulously. "Cora, why the hell would you want to tie yourself to this anchor anymore after everything it's cost you both?" My jaw set with grim determination. "Because Daniel Clark doesn't get to be the one who takes this from me, from us. He already did his damnedest to rip away our legacy, our security. I'm not about to hand him that final screw you by walking away in defeat." Ethan stared at me as if seeing me for the first time, though something almost resembling hope flickering across his haunted features. "So that's the play," I stated firmly, looking between them both. "We cut our losses, deal with the fallout by any means necessary, and build something new from the ashes. Something better, stronger, and that bastard Daniel can never touch. It's time we finally take our lives back, once and for all." The road ahead was still long and arduous, but for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I could taste the promise of something resembling redemption on the horizon. Maybe even a shot at genuine happiness again. As Stacy had predicted, getting Bennett Builders, or what was left of that shattered husk, into Chapter 11 bankruptcy was a grueling process. Endless meetings, depositions, hearings with the kind of greedy vultures who feast on the carcasses of failed businesses. Through it all, Ethan remained uncharacteristically stoic and cooperative, following Stacy's counsel to lay everything bare about Daniel's extortion plot. He'd become a hollow-eyed wraith entirely devoid of the arrogant bluster that once possessed him. In a strange way, it was the only form of penance he could offer in the face of his staggering betrayal. "You know the prosecution is going to go hard at you, right?" I warned him one evening over the papers spread across our kitchen table. "Cutting a deal is going to mean throwing yourself at their mercy." He gave a weary nod. "I know, but after everything, it's what I deserve, Cora. I've got no one to blame for this mess but myself at the end of the day." It was the most sense and accountability I'd heard from him throughout this whole sordid episode. A sad, honest reckoning of the lows his weakness had brought us. Despite the raging storm of emotions still churning inside me around Ethan's betrayal, I couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness for the broken man sitting across from me. In the end, he took a plea deal that included 18 months in a federal penitentiary and paying millions in fines and restitution. A steep price, but one most likely worth it to stay out of prison for decades. "I'll make it up to you somehow, I swear," Ethan murmured as the courthouse doors closed behind us after his sentencing. I didn't respond, lacking the energy to prod that wound further, because in my mind we'd already started on the long road towards some form of redemption and atonement. While Ethan prepared for his incarceration stint, I got to work rebuilding in earnest with a fiercely loyal group of former Bennett Builders employees, construction veterans like Gary and Miriam, who had risked everything to take Daniel down at my side. We established a new company, Providence Contractors, with a mandate to start fresh, unburdened by the corrupt baggage of the past. I instituted new ethics codes, financial controls, you name it. Anything and everything to ensure we'd never again be blindsided by the moral hell that Daniel Clark had dragged us through. When the big day came for Providence's public launch and first major bid unveiling, you could cut the tension with a knife. I stood at the podium, gazing out over the small crowd that included my surviving work family, a few reporters, and most importantly, Ethan. His eyes were shining with an emotion I hadn't seen in far too long. Pride. Not arrogant pride, but the bone-deep sense of being proud of the phoenix rising from the ashes before him. The new life being created to cauterize all the betrayal and agony of the old one. I felt my own eyes misting up as I stepped forward to make my speech. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for being here today to mark this new beginning. There were times when I never thought we'd make it to this point after everything we endured. My gaze locked with Ethan's for a brief moment, and I knew in that instant the true meaning of karma. Not petty vengeance or inflicting suffering for its own sake, but molding pain into something stronger, better, redeemed. Providence Contractors wouldn't just carry on the legacy of ethical construction that Ethan had first sown decades ago. It would stand as a monument to persevering through the darkest of times, an enduring testament that no wrong perpetrated against one's family can ever go unanswered. Daniel Clark had forged his own downfall in his arrogance and greed. Now it was our turn to build something transcendent from that reckoning.